And now I will turn it over to Interim Office of Equity Director Jeff Selby for his remarks.
Thank you so much, Director Kennard. Good afternoon, community members, city staff, directors, commissioners, and Mayor Wheeler. For the record, I'm Jeff Selby. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Interim Director of the Office of Equity and Human Rights. And for the next few weeks, we have the opportunity to discuss how the city should spend the people's money. As we listen to the presentations and dive into the requested budgets, let's continue to be vigilant about equity. Equity is a critical thinking exercise where we must remind ourselves that not everyone gets to move through the world in the same way. We must be aware of our implicit or unconscious bias, check our snap judgments and quick assumptions, and slow our thoughts down to ensure we are consciously and purposefully keeping at the top of our minds communities of color, people with disabilities, the LGBTQIA+ community, immigrants, refugees, and other systemically excluded and institutionally oppressed Portlanders. With each budget decision, let's consider, 1, how our decisions impact these communities, and 2, how is our implicit bias affecting how we make our decisions? The equity movement in the city of Portland is a call to action. It's a call to oppose anti-Black racism. It's a call to challenge policies and practices that are centered on white supremacy, a call to be accountable by acknowledging past and present harms to communities, and a call to commit to a restorative healing process. As we start the budget sessions, I want to thank my team at the Office of Equity and Human Rights for building the foundation of equity across the city and supporting city staff on behalf of disenfranchised communities. It's an absolute privilege to work alongside them. I want to acknowledge and thank equity managers in the city who are dedicated to institutionalizing equity work in their own bureaus, and all other city staff and leaders who embed equity into everything they do, even if they don't have equity in their job titles. Because as we know from our city core values, equity and anti-racism are everyone's responsibility in the city of Portland. So thank you for your time and consideration.
In 2020, the City Council formally adopted 6 values to guide the city's work: anti-racism, equity, transparency, communication, collaboration, and fiscal responsibility. And those values provide the framework for our presentation today, which you already heard from Director Kennard and CAO Tom Reinhardt. So for each of the city's values, one central service leader will present the challenges and opportunities and key budget proposals that span all of our central services. And so to start that presentation, I'm delighted to turn it back over to my colleague, Jeff Selby, the Interim Director of the Office of Equity and Human Rights. Jeff.
Thank you, Director Bluss. In the summer of 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, support for Black lives soared in our country. The city of Portland immediately responded by adopting anti-racism as one of its core values, as recommended by the Bureau of Human Resources and the Office of Equity and Human Rights. The Office of Equity sets the equity policy for the city, and our approach centers on race. We're often asked, why center on race and not other identities like the LGBTQIA+ community or veterans or seniors? And our response is, do you envision all those identities as white? Race continues to be the top indicator of social and economic well-being in our society. And if we aren't intentional in centering race, we're going to miss a lot of data that will allow us to determine root causes of the disparities we currently see with communities of color in Portland. We center race with an intersectional framework, knowing that individuals often experience multiple forms of oppression. So simply put, if we can remove barriers for folks of color, we can improve outcomes for everyone. The racial reckoning after George Floyd's murder was short-lived. In 2022, polls show that white support has not only dissipated, but it's lower than it was before. The pendulum has quickly swung in the opposite direction, and now we're seeing the backlash around the country. History being erased by book bans and rallying cries against the boogeyman of critical race theory. So our challenge as a city is to ensure we continue centering race moving forward. The Office of Equity and Human Rights team helps transform our city's internal culture so we can better serve community through our external services bureaus. We currently center race in myriad ways. Examples include our mandatory citywide Racial Equity 101 education and training program, the citywide racial equity goals and strategies, which serve as a foundation for our Bureau's racial equity plans, and the office's citywide strategy of results-based accountability for racial equity. Embedding an equity lens and a race-centered approach as we deployed the city's Emergency Coordination Center helped the city reach and support more Portlanders most impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So in Portland, we have the opportunity to be intentional about our policies, practices, procedures, and investments. Fulfilling the city's commitment to anti-racism will require sustained investment, not just an investment of time and focus, but an investment of dollars. And I'd like to lift up 3 such investments today. First, Commissioner Joanne Hardesty's office has requested to partner with the Office of Equity and Human Rights in developing an anti-white supremacy education program for city staff in partnership with Western State Center. The training would ensure that city staff learn how white nationalism has impacted our community, provide staff with skills to respond to white nationalism, and increase knowledge around the construction of white supremacy. The goal is to develop and design a strategic training plan that advances the city resolution, condemning white supremacist and alt-right groups, and continues the implementation of the City of Portland core values of equity and anti-racism.